Hello, welcome to the World Curiosities channel. Today we're going to explore a difficult but important topic, the 10 most violent countries in the world. We'll look into what leads these places to hold such alarming positions and the main factors that contribute to this violence. The list is based on indicators such as homicide rates, urban violence, activities of armed groups, internal conflicts, and corruption. It's worth noting that the situation can vary significantly from one region to another within these countries. Our goal is to inform, so we can reflect on the complexity of these situations and possible solutions. Shall we start the list? Number 1. Afghanistan. Afghanistan is considered dangerous due to a combination of factors that include ongoing armed conflicts, a long history of civil wars, and the Soviet invasion in the 1980s, followed by the U.S. invasion after the September 11th attacks. The Taliban's return to power in 2021 intensified instability in the country. Additionally, the activity of militant groups such as the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS contributes to insecurity, with violent attacks being a constant reality. Widespread violence affects the population, resulting in high rates of civilian casualties. Another factor is political instability, which hinders the implementation of effective security policies and the protection of human rights. The country also faces a severe humanitarian crisis marked by socio-economic issues like hunger, poverty, and forced displacement, exacerbated by insecurity and lack of access to basic services. These combined elements make Afghanistan one of the most dangerous places in the world, with direct consequences for the safety of the population and regional stability. Number 2. Syria. The violence in Syria results from a series of interconnected factors, including the authoritarian repression of Bashar al-Assad's regime, social and economic inequality, and interference from foreign powers. Since Assad came to power in 2000, his government has used severe repression to silence opposition, creating a climate of fear and discontent among the population. In 2011, inspired by the Arab Spring, the Syrian people began to protest for democratic reforms and better living conditions. The violent repression of these protests triggered a civil war that worsened with the fragmentation of the country into various factions. Sectarian divisions, involving groups such as Sunnis, Alawites, Christians, and Kurds, intensified the violence and complicated the peace process. Furthermore, the intervention of external powers like the United States, Russia, and Iran added a layer of complexity to the conflict, with different countries supporting rival factions. The outcome of the civil war has been one of the worst humanitarian crises in recent history, with millions displaced and a staggering number of dead and injured. Living conditions have deteriorated dramatically, with limited access to food, clean water, and medical care. Therefore, the solution to the violence in Syria is not limited to a simple ceasefire. A comprehensive effort is needed to address the underlying causes of the conflict and promote reconciliation among the country's diverse communities. Number 3. Yemen. The violence in Yemen results from a complex interaction of political, social, and economic factors. Political conflict is one of the main factors, with a history of instability and the division between North Yemen and South Yemen, which unified in 1990. The political transition following the Arab Spring in 2011 did not resolve the existing tensions. Armed groups like the Houthis and other tribal and political factions also contribute to fragmentation and violence. The conflict has intensified with external intervention from powers like Saudi Arabia and Iran, which support different sides in the struggle. The humanitarian crisis is one of the worst in the world, with millions of people facing hunger and lack of access to basic services. Additionally, sectarian and tribal divisions exacerbate the situation. Economic deterioration also generates discontent among the population. Therefore, the quest for power and control, along with external interests and internal divisions, makes peace and stability in Yemen a complex challenge that requires inclusive dialogue and so. Number 4. Somalia. The violence in Somalia results from a combination of interconnected historical, political, social, and economic factors. The collapse of the state since 1991 is one of the main contributors to instability, with the absence of a strong government leading to a struggle for power among clans and armed groups. Clan rivalries are a continuous source of conflict, while the rise of the extremist group Al-Shabaab has further complicated the situation with violent attacks against civilians and government forces. Additionally, external intervention by military forces and the humanitarian crisis resulting from violence, drought, and extreme poverty impact the population, which faces hunger and displacement. The weakened economy and the presence of illicit activities, such as piracy and smuggling, also fuel insecurity. Therefore, these interconnected factors create an environment of persistent violence, making peace and stability in Somalia an ongoing challenge that requires a comprehensive effort to address the political and social complexities of the country. Number 5. Mexico. The violence in Mexico is driven by a combination of complex factors that include the struggle for control of drug trafficking, political corruption, economic inequality, and the presence of drug cartels. Drug cartels compete with each other for control of trafficking routes and markets, resulting in violent confrontations that often involve civilians. Widespread corruption in public institutions allows cartels to operate with impunity and influence local and national politics. Additionally, economic inequality and the lack of opportunities in many communities create a conducive environment for recruiting young people into criminal groups that promise wealth and power. The violence is also exacerbated by the militarization of the government's response to organized crime, which often results in human rights abuses and greater social instability. These interconnected factors create a cycle of violence and impunity that makes security a constant concern in Mexico and challenges efforts to achieve lasting peace. Number 6. Honduras. Honduras is considered violent due to a number of factors, including high crime rates associated with gangs such as Mara Salvatrucha and Barrio 18, which control territories and engage in criminal activities like extortion, drug trafficking, and homicides. Poverty and social inequality contribute to violence, as many young people see gangs as a means of survival and belonging. Endemic corruption in government and police institutions hinders law enforcement and promotes impunity for criminals. Additionally, the presence of drug traffickers and the struggle for control over trafficking routes increase armed conflicts and homicides. The forced displacement of entire communities due to violence further exacerbates the situation and perpetuates a cycle of insecurity. These combined factors make Honduras one of the most dangerous countries in Latin America, with direct consequences for the safety and well-being of the population. Number 7. El Salvador. El Salvador faces high levels of violence due to several interconnected factors that create an environment of insecurity. One of the main issues is the strong presence of gangs, such as Mara Salvatrucha and Barrio 18, which dominate urban areas and engage in crimes like extortion and drug trafficking. This situation is exacerbated by widespread poverty and social inequality, leaving many young people without opportunities and leading them to join these gangs in search of protection and a means of survival. Additionally, corruption within government and police institutions hinders the fight against crime, resulting in a sense of impunity that further fuels violence. Territorial disputes between gangs also generate constant conflicts, making local communities increasingly dangerous. Moreover, the country faces significant economic challenges, including a lack of access to basic services and education, which hinders social development and perpetuates a cycle of violence and despair. These combined elements make El Salvador one of the most dangerous places in Latin America, directly impacting the lives of its citizens. Number 8. Venezuela. Venezuela is considered violent due to a series of complex factors, including the economic and humanitarian crisis that has affected the country in recent years, leading to food and medicine shortages and an increase in crime and violence among the population. The presence of armed groups and collectives operating in conflict areas adds to the insecurity, as does the involvement of gangs dedicated to drug trafficking and organized crime. The deterioration of police institutions and endemic corruption hinder law enforcement and promote impunity. Political repression and human rights violations by the government also contribute to a climate of fear and violence in communities. The unstable political situation and increased polarization exacerbate social tensions, resulting in protests and conflicts in the streets. These interconnected factors make Venezuela one of the most violent countries in Latin America, with a direct impact on the daily lives of its citizens. Number 9. Brazil. Brazil faces high levels of violence due to a combination of social, economic, and political factors. Social inequality is one of the main contributors, with a large portion of the population living in poverty, which increases vulnerability to crime. The presence of criminal factions that control drug trafficking and other illegal activities in various regions of the country adds to the violence, especially in urban areas. Additionally, corruption within public institutions and the inefficiency of the justice system hinder law enforcement, resulting in impunity for many crimes. Limited access to basic services, such as education and healthcare, perpetuates a cycle of violence and criminality. The culture of violence, reflected in certain segments of society, and the lack of effective public policies to address these issues further exacerbate the situation. Social tensions, which often manifest in protests and conflicts, are also a contributing factor to violence in the country. In summary, the combination of social inequality, organized criminal activity, corruption, and lack of access to essential services makes Brazil one of. Number 10. Colombia. Colombia faces high levels of violence due to a series of historical, social, and economic factors. One of the main contributors is the presence of illegal armed groups, including guerrillas like the FARC and the ELN, as well as drug trafficking organizations that control drug routes. These groups often engage in violent clashes with each other and with state security forces, resulting in a high number of homicides and forced displacements. Social inequality and poverty also play a significant role, creating an environment where many individuals feel pressured to engage in criminal activities as a means of survival. Corruption within public institutions and the weakness of the judicial system hinder the fight against crime and contribute to impunity. Additionally, the culture of violence, which has deep historical roots in the country, and the lack of effective public policies to promote peace and security exacerbate the situation. Although Colombia has made progress in some areas, violence remains a persistent problem that affects the daily lives of many Colombians. Thank you for watching another video from World Curiosities. Please subscribe to the channel, and thank you very much.